Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Anderson House. My name is Andrew Allen and I'm the Historical Programs Manager for the American Revolution Institute of the Society of the Cincinnati. The American Revolution Institute promotes knowledge and appreciation for the achievement of American independence by supporting advanced study, developing exhibitions and other historical programs and tours, advocating historic preservation, and providing resources to classrooms nationwide that benefit teachers, students, and scholars alike. Since 1938, the Society of the Cincinnati has done all of this work from its headquarters right here at Anderson House, a National Historic Landmark that was completed in 1905 as the winter residence of Larz and Isabel Anderson in Washington, D.C. Today's Lunch Bite features Rachel Nellis discussing a scrapbook documenting Isabel Anderson's gift of Anderson House to the Society of the Cincinnati in 1938 from our library collections and is currently featured in our exhibition, Affairs of State, 118 Years of Diplomacy and Entertaining at Anderson House. Rachel Nellis is the Institute's Research Services Librarian, having joined the professional staff here at Anderson House in 2019. She was responsible for facilitating the library's reading room, along with the many resources within the library, including the development and maintenance of the Institute's online digital library. Rachel holds a master's degree in information studies with a concentration in archival work. Prior to joining the staff, Rachel actually served as an archivist at various locations, including the Cosmos Club, which is located right across the street from our headquarters. But before I turn things over to Rachel, there are a few housekeeping items, as usual, for our virtual attendees joining us on Zoom this afternoon. Following today's presentation, there will be a question and answer session, so please feel free to submit your questions for Rachel at any point during the presentation, and you can do that by using the Q&A function that can be found at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to incorporate them with our live audience questions. Should you have any technical related questions or comments, those can be submitted using the chat function, and one of our staff members will be monitoring that and will do their best to assist you. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming Rachel Nellis.
Hi, everyone. So I'm presenting a scrapbook today. In July of 2020, we received a gift from the family of Alice Churchill Meeks containing 3 of Isabel Anderson's books. She was an avid writer of children's books and travelogues, 3 literary journals containing Isabel's writing, and lastly, 2 scrapbooks created by Isabel. We are no stranger to Isabel's scrapbooks, having a number of them in our collection already. However, one of the scrapbooks received that July has the spine label Society of the Cincinnati, and the contents document Isabel's gift of Anderson House to the Society and the events that followed from 1937 until around 1942. The scrapbook is now featured in our exhibition, Affairs of State. The gift of Anderson House to the Society of the Cincinnati was an incredible turning point in the life of Isabel Anderson and the Society. The scrapbook serves as a public record of the gift, her honorary membership in the Society, and the use of the house for social and philanthropic events through the mediums of newspaper clippings, pamphlets, and correspondence. The scrapbook illuminates the beginning of a new era for the Society and Isabel. Anderson House was completed in the spring of 1905 and quickly became one of Washington, D.C.'s premier mansions for hosting diplomatic, patriotic, philanthropic, and cultural events. As the winter home of Larz and Isabel Anderson, the couple showcased their vast art collection from across the globe and hosted high society galas. The home was specifically designed with entertainment in mind and in a way already curated as a museum about Larz, Isabel, and the Great American Experiment. Larz and Isabel were both especially proud of their patriotic roots in service to the United States. Born in 1866, Larz was the son of Civil War General Nicholas Longworth Anderson and great-grandson of Lieutenant Colonel Richard Clough Anderson, an original member of the Society of the Cincinnati. He graduated from Harvard in 1888, toured the world for a year and a half, and began his diplomatic career in 1891. His diplomatic career culminated in posts as minister to Belgium from 1911 to 1912 and ambassador to Japan from 1912 to 1913. He participated in a number of patriotic societies, including the Sons of the American Revolution, the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States, and Order of the Spanish-American War for his own military service. Of course, Larz was also a member of the Society of the Cincinnati. Isabel Anderson, born in 1876, was the only child of Civil War naval officer George Hamilton Perkins. Like Larz, Isabel could trace her family back to the Revolutionary War and had at least 8 ancestors who fought. During World War I, Isabel joined prominent American women in support of the war effort, and she was a leader of Washington's Red Cross activities and Belgian relief work. She hosted a Red Cross cantina in the backyard here at Anderson House and traveled abroad in 1917 and 1918, caring for the war's sick and wounded in France and Belgium. For her wartime service, Isabel received honors including the American Red Cross Service Medal, the Croix de Guerre from France, and the Medal of Elizabeth from Belgium. Isabel was a member of a number of societies, including the Daughters of the American Revolution and the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America. In addition to her accolades, she received honorary doctorates from George Washington University and Boston University. Larz and Isabel took pride in their many achievements and curated their Washington home to reflect that. It's clear that Larz was proud to be a member of the Society of the Cincinnati, and today you just have to look up at the ceiling of the ballroom to see the Society's iconic eagle insignia, or stand in front of the fireplace in the Great Stair Hall to see the eagle over the mantle. The Society is embedded in this house. The Andersons lived and entertained at Anderson House until Larz Anderson's death in 1937, and with no children, the widowed Isabel gifted Anderson House to the Society of the Cincinnati. In 1934, Larz Anderson wrote to Just Blair, a fellow member of the Society of the Cincinnati in the state of Virginia, who was an active participant in society affairs in the early 20th century, about a house for the Cincinnati. He wrote, "I have always been interested in this idea of a headquarters, but have never, as far as I can recall, talked of the matter to anyone but my lawyer. In fact, my interest goes so far back as the building of the house in Massachusetts Avenue, for even then I introduced the eagle in the pediment in front and had frescoes allegorical painted in his day by Siddons Mowbray." 5 years earlier, in 1929, Just Blair had spearheaded, with 2 other Virginia members, a campaign with a brochure titled "A Plea for a House" for an official society headquarters after observing other hereditary and fraternal organizations building or purchasing headquarters buildings around Washington, D.C. The society was experiencing rapid growth in the 1920s, with membership nearly doubling since the turn of the century. And Just Blair and others were looking for a headquarters that would house the society archive that they anticipated to grow, with accounts of the members of the society since the Revolution up to present day. They were hopeful the house could serve as a grand location for society members to host dinners and receptions. However, not all members were convinced that a headquarters in Washington was necessary, and when put to a vote at the 1929 Triennial Meeting to buy number 8 Jackson Place, it did not pass. The idea of a headquarters had stayed with Just Blair, and nearly 10 years later, in 1937, Isabel donated her Washington home to the society. Isabel had her advisor, Roger Amory, write in late April 1937 to Just Blair, "Mrs. Anderson authorizes me to advise you that she would like to help fulfill the hopes of her late husband, the Honorable Larz Anderson, that this house become the national headquarters of the Society of the Cincinnati." Now for the scrapbook. The scrapbook is a rich resource for exploring the lives of the Andersons and the history of the great house that we are sitting in today. Through this item, we see the transaction from Isabel's perspective and her careful attention to the publicity of her gift, her associate membership, and the use of Anderson House through the 1940s. Isabel was pasting newspaper clippings, but also included correspondence from society members, ephemera, and meeting minutes from the Society of the Cincinnati's 1938 Triennial Meeting held in Hartford, Connecticut. The scrapbook picks up where the society left off in 1937. The society could not accept the gift of Anderson House unless it was exempted from property taxes, and a bill was introduced to the U.S. Congress in the fall of 1937, gaining such exemption. However, it was defeated because of objections by the commissioners of the District of Columbia. In January of 1938, the society attempted again and to great success. In one of the first openings of the scrapbook, Isabel has taped in a copy of H.R. 9024 to exempt from taxation certain properties of the Society of the Cincinnati, a corporation of the District of Columbia, next to a biographical sketch of her late husband. H.R. 9024 was introduced by Representative Virginia E. Jenks of Indiana. Virginia had her own ties to the Society of the Cincinnati, described in a newspaper clipping from the Hartford, Connecticut Times. Representative Virginia E. Jenks, Democrat of Indiana, proudly displays on the wall of her office a framed photostatic copy of the original certificate of membership in the Society of the Cincinnati, which George Washington personally signed and issued to Captain Henry Vanderburgh, her paternal great-grandfather, who was a captain in Washington's army. The bill was passed on February 24th, 1938, to exempt the land, the buildings, and contents thereof from all taxes, subject to the proviso that said society shall maintain therein a national museum for the custody and preservation of historical documents, relics, and archives, especially those pertaining to the American Revolution, which museum shall be accessible to the public as such reasonable hours and under such regulations as may from time to time be prescribed by said society. Not long after the success of H.R. 9024, the Society held their Triennial Meeting in Hartford, Connecticut from June 15th to 16th, 1938, for which Isabel taped in a copy of the proceedings and notes, see pages 31 through 37, Mrs. Larz Anderson. Isabel and her gift of the house were mentioned and recognized numerous times during the meeting. There was a resolution of thanks adopted that read, "The General Society have received with gratitude the report of the munificent offer made by Mrs. Larz Anderson of the house at Washington, built and furnished by her and her late husband, with the generous intent of making it a permanent museum and headquarters of the Society. We unite in expressing our appreciation of it and our desire to accept it for the purpose and under the terms which the donors have specified. Resolved that the General Society of the Cincinnati assembled do extend to Mrs. Larz Anderson profound thanks for her and Mr. Anderson's home in Washington as a historic monument and shrine of the Society." And additionally at this meeting, the delegates resolved as evidence of the esteem and affection in which the Society of the Cincinnati hold Mrs. Anderson, that she be made and is hereby made an honorary associate of the Society with the privilege of wearing her late husband's eagle, it being the Society's desire thus to offer her an unprecedented and signal honor and to extend to her a privilege never previously accorded. Isabel paid close attention to publicity about the meeting in Hartford, as demonstrated by the large number of clippings relating to that meeting throughout the scrapbook. The articles list notable speakers, including Count René Douanel de Saint-Quentin, the French ambassador to the United States. Many clippings also note that two Society of the Cincinnati members who were decorated with the French Legion of Honor by the French ambassador, and there are clippings announcing Isabel as the first woman to be an honorary associate of the Society. And many of the clippings also note the gift of Anderson House. One of my favorite openings of the scrapbook features a letter from Walter Channing pinned onto the page next to a large newspaper spread from the Washington Times titled "The Larz Anderson Home, Famous Mansion to Become Museum." The juxtaposition of the 1937 letter, when the gift was uncertain, with a huge announcement the next year about the acquisition of the house to serve as museum and headquarters, seems to be an intentional display by Isabel. The letter is friendly and probably indicative of the feelings of much of the Society towards Isabel at this moment in time. He wrote, "I wanted to write a line to tell you, I have read with much interest your history of the Anderson family, a very distinguished family, patriots, all of them, a proud lineage to hand down to posterity. I received a nice letter from Bishop Perry, expressing the hope that the Society could arrange to accept the very wonderful gift planned by you and Larz. I am off to our meeting July 4th at Newport, and if the question is raised at that time, will express my feelings and hopes for a shrine to house the Society." The article lauds the passing of the bill and refers to the new museum as the only revolutionary relics museum of its kind in the United States and an elegant landmark in Washington. In April of 1939, Isabel ceremonially presented the house to the society, for which there are many pages of coverage. At the ceremony, Isabel was honored and presented with Larz's eagle insignia to wear. The eagle was presented by Vice President General Bryce Metcalf. As one article explains, the President General John C. Davis was ill at home in Baltimore on this day. The press photos show Isabel with the plaque that still hangs in the entrance hall where the ceremony took place. In the back of the scrapbook, Isabel also includes letters from the spring of 1939 from members of the society regarding the business of the house and welcoming her to the society family. Isabel continued to be proud of her achievements and added the gift to her list. She clipped articles profiling her as a writer, musician, benefactor, and a great philanthropist. And in a way, her choice clippings also help a modern reader gain some insight into what Isabel's mental state might have been after the death of her husband, Larz. This transition can't have been easy. In one article, she is quoted as saying, "If I have any gift, it's only perseverance. I like to do things, and when I start something, I finish it. Until recently, I was at my desk early each morning and working regularly at my writing. But since my husband passed on, I've had so much business to look after, I haven't written as much." The article continues to describe the gift of the house, and again she is quoted, "It was our home since 1905 and is filled with interesting things we collected on our travels throughout the world." The house had just been opened by the society to the public as a museum. A second article gives more insight when describing a reception at Anderson House, where, quote, "men from all over the nation came to pay homage to Mrs. Anderson for this magnificent home just bestowed upon the sons of the Cincinnati as a national shrine." The columnist posited that it was perhaps a trying ordeal to Mademoiselle Isabel Perkins Anderson, shy and gentle by nature, to meet so many people at her reception, for since her husband's death last year, she has withdrawn from the social world and devoted herself to carrying out the wishes of the late ambassador. No one of Washington's famous widows could be more conscientious, generous, or valuable. While the scrapbook covers the Society of the Cincinnati, Isabel was also keeping tabs on the philanthropic and high society use of the house. In February 1941, a fashion show was held to raise money for societies aiding refugees of France and England. The Sunday Star wrote, "Fashion-minded women will go to the Larz Anderson house Wednesday afternoon for the fashion show and tea, which will be held for the benefit of relief for French refugees and for refugees of England." Isabel includes the invitation stuck between two clipped images from the newspaper. A couple pages later, she pastes in the published event overview. The event was a success with a reported 1,000 women in attendance. It wrote, "Ladies filled every nook and cranny of Anderson House, sat on staircases, and hung perilously on the balconies for the good of refugees in England and for a glimpse of a series of stunning costumes." The second philanthropic event that Isabel recorded in the scrapbook has a surprising title: "George III's beard sold back to British. RAF gets $10. In April of 1941, an auction was held at Anderson House. Prospective buyers had to pay $1 a head to get into the house, with proceeds going to the Royal Air Force. Two items of note auctioned were George III's beard, which they note in the article, for the life of them, they couldn't say where it comes from, and it was sold to Winthrop Crane of the British Embassy. The second item was an autographed copy of President Roosevelt's inaugural address, which Breckinridge Long, Assistant Secretary of State, bought for $20, even though, quote, "he doubtless could have gotten one for free." Visitors of particular note were Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter and Richard G. Casey, the Australian minister. This event was hosted by Librarian of Congress and his wife, Archibald McLeish. It's surprising to see that Isabel does not document the Navy occupation of Anderson House, except for an installment in the Boston Traveler paper called "Girls in Washington, Navy Girls Work in Odd Setting." Famous Larz Anderson House filled with art treasures, now busy office. This was part of a series providing guidance to women on finding defense jobs in Washington during World War II. It's kind of a strange article, and it's more of a profile on the Andersons' travels in Japan and their art collecting abroad than it is about the Navy. There's specific attention paid to the Buddha statue that used to greet visitors in the entrance hall and now sits welcomingly in the backyard today. The only insight into the women working for the Navy is in a short paragraph that reads, "Now the Society has turned the mansion over to the Navy. Thousands of its treasures have been stored, but there is much immovable decor that makes the Navy girls feel as if they were working in a museum. The clatter of 1,000 typewriters cannot exorcise the dreadful sadness of the Great Hall, where Larz and Isabel unpacked their treasures from Japan." Um, Perhaps she included this particular article because it does focus so heavily on her and Larz's traveling and collecting. I'm not really sure. The scrapbook also includes links to another one of Larz and Isabel Anderson's Washington, D.C. philanthropic endeavors, the Washington National Cathedral. In December 1927, 10 years before Larz's death, they made a $500,000 bequest to the Cathedral Foundation, expressing his wish that, in the city which has been my home all my life, that my beloved wife and I, who have been inseparable in life, may rest together hereafter. This gift would become St. Mary's Chapel within the cathedral walls, and construction began in 1928 and was completed in 1932. By the time of Larz's death, the chapel was furnished with Anderson House treasures, including 6 Flemish tapestries. There are a few instances of St. Mary's Chapel interspersed throughout the scrapbook in unassuming places. The first instance is a letter pasted next to newspaper clippings from New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts about the ceremony of Isabel presenting her home to the society. The letter is from Bishop Freeman of the National Cathedral, writing that he was happy to learn that your dear husband's birthday was appropriately remembered at Washington Cathedral, and that the canon in residence conducted a brief service at his tomb in the presence of representatives of the Society of the Cincinnati and others. This seems to have been the second annual laying of a wreath by society representatives at the tomb of Larz, the first happening on August 15th, 1938. The second of note is a letter tucked in the back of the scrapbook from someone named Herbert. He writes to Isabel in April of 1947 to report that he attended a service at the Washington National Cathedral, and while there he walked through the St. Mary Chapel. He had intended to send pictures of St. Mary's Chapel, which had an installment of Easter lilies, but it was absolutely against the rules and regulations to take pictures of its interior without special permission. Herbert briefly mentions in the letter, and I'm assuming this is the reason it's tucked into the society scrapbook, is that while glancing over the Washington Evening Star that night, he noted that under the heading of drama, that the return of Horace Foote is to be presented nightly this month at the courtyard of 2118 Massachusetts Avenue. Although Herbert originally included the clipping, it's not in the scrapbook, so I found it online, wondering if it had more detail. Was it a society event or a fundraiser? But unfortunately, the paper does not provide any hints. It's basically the same sentence in Herbert's letter. It's clear that the St. Mary's Chapel pieces were included due to references of the society and its members. However, St. Mary's Chapel was in many ways another home to Isabel. It's where Larz was interred and Isabel as well in 1948, and the chapel houses some of their precious artworks collected on travels together. So there's so much to glean from the scrapbook. You can get lost reading all of the clippings. I spent too much time reading everything and comparing the details, finding names of famous Washingtonians or diplomats. And overall, the scrapbook is documentation of Isabel's pride in her house and pride in her husband, who wanted to gift the house to the society. The presence of the Andersons was alive and well in the first decade of the society headquarters, and it continues to be honored today through our tours and programming. So with that, please visit our exhibition, Affairs of State, 118 Years of Diplomacy and Entertainment at Anderson House, where you can see this scrapbook displayed, but also learn the long history of the house from the time it was completed in 1905 to present day. So, thank you. Nothing. Cool. Emily? Sure. So the question was, the library has other scrapbooks from Isabel. What are they and how many do we have? I can't remember the exact number. It's at least 6 or 7, I feel. And a lot of them, this is definitely the latest scrapbook we have from her. We have a couple that document her writing career and have clippings from newspapers, just announcing new books she's published or author talks and things like that. We have one covering her time in the DAR when she served as the librarian there. And then we have some that talk about her Red Cross service, so which is actually also in Affairs of State. So documenting her time in the United States with the Red Cross and abroad. And I think we also have 2 scrapbooks that cover different elections in the United States. So yeah, a really interesting and great collection from Isabel. Yes. Yeah, they were very politically attuned and had friends in all sorts of places in the government. So, and many of them would have been entertained here and dining here and all of that. So,
They have siblings and do they visitors and do they present here at Anderson House?
so Isabel was an only child. Oh my gosh, I cannot remember if Larz had siblings. Okay. He had, okay, great. There's some docents in the audience that are helping me out. Larz had a sister, so I'm sure she had come here at some point. But yeah. So where did Isabel live after she gave Anderson House to the society? And if she came back to DC, where would she stay? So after giving the house to the society, she actually had a room at Anderson House that she was welcome to use when she was in town. I think that was also part of the stipulation of the gift. And then where did she move to? They had a house in Brookline, Weld, so I think she still spent time up there. And she also had a house in New Hampshire where I think she spent a large amount of her time. So she moved back up to New England, where she was originally from. All right. Well, I think that's it then. If you all wanted to go up and check out the exhibition, you're welcome to. Thanks.